So here we are starting the book of Ruth, and we're going to do an introduction and chapter 1 this evening. And I want to walk you through just a couple of overview highlights regarding the book of Ruth before we get fully immersed in the text itself. Just so you know, and you may or may not know, when are the events of the book of Ruth to have taken place? The book of Ruth is set, most scholars believe that it's right here in this circled area, which is the time period of Gideon, the judge, one of the early judges of Israel. So this is the period. What's that?
What circle area?
This right here.
I'll see that red.
Yeah, it's a red circle over pink, so it's blending in slightly. But you know, you've got Moses and the children of Israel leaving Egypt, spending 40 years in the wilderness, and then you got Joshua taking over, and he takes them into the promised land, and things go pretty well, but kind of start to slack off near the end of Joshua's life, and then you got a period of judges for a couple of 100 years. We have judges in the land of Israel. And the book of Ruth is happening right there in the early part of the book of Judges, but by what appears to be approximately 1160 BC. Okay, so according to the latest estimates of when the children of Israel left Egypt, that would have been like 1400 BC approximately. Not really confident about that, but that's the kind of the timeline. So the book of Ruth is happening, the events of the book of Ruth is happening at around 1150 or 1160 BC. And that is approximately 125 years before the rise of King David. And that's kind of the timeline about when the events of this book are taking place. And this little slide right here, I love timelines. I know that this thing is kind of big and you can't see it very well. Does anybody own that one big fold-out book? I see that book everywhere. I see it online. We saw it on a TV show the other day. Some history teacher, had it spread out on his wall. When I taught history, I had it spread out on my wall. It's just such a neat thing. But timelines are just super cool. You can see on this timeline, it's really small, but you can see the pharaohs of Egypt down here at the bottom, and you've got the Assyrian Empire up at the top. It's kind of showing you concurrent empires that are running. It's just fascinating. But that's just my love of history popping out there. So just after this timeline on this page ends, just about here, you'll see King David and then King Solomon arise about 125 to 230 years later after the book of Ruth. So this is where our action is taking place on this little map. You can see that we have the kingdom of Judah down in the south here. You got the kingdom of Israel that is spread out on both the west and the east side of the Jordan River. You got the kingdom, half of the tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Gad on this side, on the west side of the Jordan River, and then all of the other tribes on the west side of the Jordan River. You got the Ammonites up in the north, the Moabites down in the south, and then Edom even further south. Now, I'll give you a little bit more information regarding that in just a moment, but you can see here's Bethlehem, Bethlehem, the house of bread, where they'd come up and probably cross the river at Jericho, which is the nearest crossing as far as I understand. So they just kind of head up, cross that river, and head right down into Moab because of this famine that is happening in the land of Judah. So let's get a little bit deeper into that. So this is the historical background. Nobody knows who wrote this book. It's certainly not written by Ruth. It was probably because of several factors, and I'll go through those in just a moment. You can see that this book was probably written between 900 and 600 BC. So that's a number of years later, probably during the time period, anywhere between the time period of Solomon and the exile to Babylon. So it was a number of 300-400 years later that this book was written regarding the events that happened 400 years ago. So it was not written contemporaneously. It was written long after the fact, and by whom, nobody knows. Now, the question is, what is the purpose of this book? Why did somebody write this book 400 or 500 years later after the events? And I want to share with you something that, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, you yourselves can determine. But I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of naivete regarding the scriptures that a lot of mainstream people who believe in the Bible just kind of take for granted that this book is 100% true and it all happened, and they don't think about the actual historicity of these things, that they were written by regular people, just like you and me, under the inspiration of God and for a clear purpose. But what's interesting, I think, in a lot of cases is that the person who wrote this book had their own purposes in mind. But I think that what's the power of our God is that God has a purpose for this book as well. And even though I think you can see that what the real true purpose of the author of this book is to clearly establish the line of David as the rightful heirs to the kingdom of God. That's the political purpose. And that's one of the things that was very interesting to me in reading this, is that historical scholarship and linguists who study the text and say, well, what words and phrases are they using? It's kind of beyond the scope of what I study, but hardcore biblical scholars will analyze the words and the phrases and the language that is used in this book and say, comparing it to books that were written in the time of Moses and shortly thereafter, like, this phrase wouldn't have been used because it wasn't popular. So they, studying the linguistics of the text shows them that it was written hundreds of years later, and then they have to figure out, well, why was it written? What's the purpose? And I think that's something that we often overlook, is each one of these books has a purpose that the author has in his mind. And I think we sometimes forget that as far as we are aware of, there are very few books of the Bible that were literally dictated by God to man and told, write this down. Very few. Does anybody know some? Revelation is definitely one of them. What else? Huh? Part of Ezekiel, yep. Parts of Jeremiah and Isaiah as well were definitely not dictated, but revelation was given, and it was written down, and it was God instructed the prophet to write it down. Yes? The Torah is frankly the only book that we're aware of that came directly from God and said, I'm going to speak this right to you and I want you to write it down. That's the only book that we're aware of that happened. The others were given by a certain type of revelation that is, well, God himself will explain. To prophets, I speak in dreams and in visions and in dark sayings. Not so with my servant Moses. I speak to him face to face like a man speaks to his friend. And so that was directly written by God, you might say. Now, for the rest of the books, these are people with possibly ulterior motives. They have a purpose for writing these books, and that's okay. That's okay. A humanist scholar might look at that and say, well, that corrupts the whole thing. But I don't believe that, because what's just tremendously blows my mind every time I think about it is that you have so many authors over so long a period of time writing these books for what may be their own purposes, but it all just beautifully weaves together the same story that's all completely unified. It's just amazing. And that's why I put up here the will of man versus the will of God, because I believe that you'll see from the book of Ruth that there's a purpose here. And it's not the purpose that God had necessarily, but the purpose that God had for this book is just shining right through. I think, and scholarship seems to support, that the author of this book really wanted to just firmly establish that King David and his line is the rightful rulership of Israel. Because there's, yes ma'am. Angela.
That fits with your timing if it's written between Solomon and the exile. If it's written about the time of Solomon, we have the kingdom about to divide.
Yes. And one of the things that I studied is some of the interesting history leading up to the rise of the King Saul and King David and King Solomon. You know that when David became king, for the first 7 years of his kingdom, he only ruled in Judea. He did not rule the 10 northern tribes.
Who did?
No one. They were still under the period. They had local rulers and clans leaders. David only ruled in the region of Judah for 7 years, and then he expanded his empire and took under his wing. And basically, it was because he allied. Remember, he had two commanders. Remember the two commanders of his army, Joab and Abner. Abner was Saul's former commander of his army, and when he brought him under his wing, I think that politically Abner was able to sway the loyalty of the 10 northern tribes to David. And then David, from that point on, ruled all 12 tribes. But he only ruled the tribe of Judah for 7 years. And so there's a big political thing, because those people in the north, they were for King Saul and his ancestors. They did not readily agree to have David as their king. So after the fact, we have that same problem again. After Solomon, the empire divides. And you've got people from the tribe of Ephraim and other of the 10 tribes who are vying for the political leadership against King David's ancestors. So I think that's one of the reasons that it shows you that this book was written during that time period, because it's basically what you would consider a polemical. It's a political tract. This is showing you the history of King David and his righteous ancestors, and showing that God's hand was in the raising up of David, and that David is the true line of kings. And why is that important to us? Because Yeshua is in the line of King David. If King David is not the rightful leadership of the kingdom of Israel, then the Messiah Yeshua is not from the right people, right? So, and I think clearly from our books, you can see King David is absolutely the ruler of Israel. But just contrasting the will of man versus the will of God. Yes, Jared?
Do you know how adopted lineage works?
You mean like a Levirate marriage?
No, right, so Yeshua wasn't actually born of Joseph, right? So he was adopted. So I was just curious how that actually works. How does an adopted lineage work?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know that I would be able to speak definitively about that, but I don't even know that would apply in Yeshua's case, because, I'm sure he was adopted by Joseph as his substitute father, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, because it's so different. I mean, God is his father, and although he would have been politically adopted by Joseph, I don't know enough about that, frankly. I don't. Do you have any insight yourself?
I don't. I'm just so as I go through Jewish apologetics, right,
mm-hmm.
trying to deconstruct and reconstruct, that is one of the arguments that they'll use, is saying, well, if the Messiah has to be from the line of Judah, mm-hmm. and you say that he was born of a virgin, mm-hmm. well, then he's not actually in the line of Judah.
Sure.
So I was just
No, I think that's a good insight.
And say that lineage comes through the mother?
No. So lineage comes, tribal lineage comes through the father, and national lineage comes through the mother, right? So only Jewish women can bear Jews.
Yeah.
And the man is what tells you what tribe they're from.
And that certainly could be, but we also know that that's all tradition, because there's not really much in the scriptures about that. But I would say, what I have heard, long ago, is that both of Yeshua's parents are from the lineage of David. Is what the text.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, the text shows that both Joseph and Mary were both Netzarim from the region of Nazareth, where the ancestors of David lived. And so the lineage shows that both the mother and the adopted father were from the lineage of King David. So it frankly doesn't matter either way, whether it's through you want to count him coming through the mother, or if you want to do some kind of an adoption thing, that's certainly possible. Gracie.
That's basically what I was going to say. It gives both lineages in Matthew, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And Luke.
And Luke, yeah.
And Luke. So that you've got the lineage of Joseph and of Mary.
Yep.
Both of them
Yep.
were from the same
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, yeah, they're both from the tribe of Judah. So it doesn't really matter which parent you want to attach him to, frankly. Absolutely.
Well, it's good that it comes from her because the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Lord chose Joseph to be the earthly
Yeah.
to bring him up.
That's right.
But
That's right.
he's totally God and totally man.
That's right. Absolutely right. Good insight, you guys. So this is definitely some propaganda for the Davidic kings, but there are other themes that come into play here, whether the author intended that originally or not. We can see that the kinsman redeemer in action, this is one of the most clear pictures of the kinsman redeemer that we have in the scriptures. And we're going to study that out as we get into this a little deeper. We can also see that loving kindness of God is granted to the Gentiles, as Ruth is a clear demonstration of. The kinsman redeemer as a type of the Messiah. So there's really two different aspects of the kinsman redeemer. We have the kinsman redeemer, just the overall picture of what that looks like, but it's also a foreshadowing of the Messiah Yeshua as the kinsman redeemer. And then also a faithful remnant illustration, because you know what is the characteristic phrase when you read the period of the Judges. What is repeated in almost every chapter of the book of Judges? There's one phrase that just keeps getting repeated over and over and over. What is it? Anyone? In those days, there was no king of Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
It was like the USA.
Yes. So that is the refrain that keeps happening over and over and over in the book of Judges. And you can see it's up and down, up and down, up and down. You get a righteous judge, breaks down the idols, tears down the idols, puts the kibosh on worshiping, an idolatrous stuff, and everybody gets gung-ho. And then the next judge comes along, and then the people slip away and forget about what they were doing, and they get back into idolatry and false worship, and God punishes them, and they cry out to God, and He sends them a judge to rescue them, and it just keeps happening over and over and over and over for like 250 years. That's how long we have been a country, you guys. The United States is a baby nation. I mean, we've been here since 1629, and that's a bit longer, but it wasn't really a nation. It was just a couple of scraggly colonists from England, But when we really became a nation in 1783, or 17, you want to go into the 1700s, we're talking about a nation that's only 250, 260 years old. We got a lot of history with these people. But a remnant of a faithful illustration, an illustration of a faithful remnant. So when the nation is going up and down, up and down, up and down, just alternating back and forth between idolatry and worshiping of the true God, you have this illustration of Ruth and her ancestors in the land of Bethlehem of Judea that are sticking firm to God. Okay, so that's another big theme in this book. Just a quick note on the placement in the Canon. When you open up your Bible, where do you find the book of Ruth? In most of your Bibles, you'll find it right after the book of Judges, because it's kind of like seen as an appendix, to the book of Judges. And that is, if your Bible was translated from the Greek Septuagint into English, you'll find Ruth after Judges. If you have a Bible, one of these Hebrew Roots Bibles or the Complete Jewish Bible, those were not translated from the Septuagint. Those were translated from the Hebrew Tanakh text. And you will then find the book of Ruth after the Song of Solomon. And in some translations, you will actually find Ruth included in the Megillot. You know what Megillot is? That is called literally scrolls. And those are the scrolls that were used in worship, whether it's the Psalms, because they sing the Psalms, in a synagogue Sabbath service. The book of Ruth was read. Does anybody know when the book of Ruth is read every year in the synagogue? It's in Shavuot. Yep, every year at Shavuot they are reading the book of Ruth, and so this book and a lot of their scrolls was amended to what's called the Megillot. A Megillah is a scroll. Megillot is plural of scrolls. Okay? So now a little bit more little bit more background, the time period. Why is God not precise? Why doesn't God inspire this author to give us clear indication of when this happened? And it's frankly, it happens all the time in the Bible. That's why there's such a huge conundrum in the Christian community regarding young earth versus old earth creation type stuff, is because God does not give that type of information. And I think we have to remember, and if you don't know it, learn it. The Bible is not concerned with when. It's concerned with who and why. The important thing is not when God created the earth, but that God created the earth. The important things in all of the books of the Bible, God is not concerned with time. Humans are concerned with time. And from our Western kind of Gentile perspective, frankly, it can be demonstrated that the people living in the Bible times also, that's one of those Hebraisms where you consider that Western versus Eastern mindset. Those people in that day did not really concern themselves very much with time. They had a bit more of a timeless attitude. They didn't run their lives by clocks and calendars. They had they painted with broad strokes as far as historical context is concerned. And so it might have been a curiosity to them, but they didn't really concern themselves with it very much, not like we do. We're very much time-oriented. And I think you can see it real clearly in our day and age where we're incredibly preoccupied with time, living longer. Keeping track of the minutes because our lives have gotten so busy that we're trying to eke out every little bit of life that we can get out of this time period. And you know, it reminds me very much of the book of Daniel in chapter 11 where it says people will be running to and fro. We are running to and fro. We are definitely running to and fro. So the Bible is not terribly concerned with when something happened, but who did it and why. And so that's why we don't have very good time period indicators in this book. But we do know that this happened in the period of a famine. That's what you're going to learn right in the first chapter, right in the first couple of words, is we're going to see that this happened in a period of a famine. And when you look at the book of Judges, it doesn't tell us a lot about the famines. There's not a lot of mention of famine. What we are made aware of is in the early parts of the book of Judges, when this book is supposed to have taken place, is that there was famine, but not because of not enough rain or bugs infested the crops. It was because of war, most likely. When you read in this period of the Judges during, does anybody remember the story of Gideon? Do you remember when we are first introduced to Gideon as a character? I'm pretty sure, and I may be completely wrong on this, but I believe that Gideon was the one who was secretly performing farming because the Midianites were raiding and burning their crops, coming and stealing their food and burning what they couldn't carry away. And so we find Gideon secretly treading grapes in a hidden wine press. And then he is told that he's going to go and defeat these Midianites who are tormenting the land, and he asks for the sign, with the cloth and all that stuff. Yeah, but he was doing it in secret, right? Yeah. So he's threshing wheat in a secret place because the Midianites kept attacking. The Midianites and the Amalekites in league together kept attacking the land of Israel and stealing the food and then just destroying what crops and food they couldn't carry away so that the people of Israel would starve. That is most likely what is being discussed here regarding the famine that we read about in the opening lines of this text. It is not a natural famine, but one that is caused by war. And these are Moabite and Amalekite raiders. Now, there are two books in the Bible that are named after women. Do you remember what they are? Esther and Ruth. Okay? Fascinating little comparison and contrast between Esther and Ruth. They form really interesting, both, what do you call that, a menorah pattern, if you want to call it a Lutenism, a chiasm, or a Torah pattern, a structure from the menorah pattern. So these two books, and Ruth is also one of only two books named after a Gentile. Do you know the other one? It's Job. Job was not an Israelite. Okay, so here we have just a brief comparison and contrast of Ruth and Esther. And I only throw this in there because it's fascinating, and I want you to take a couple of notes and think about this and maybe look at this, because I think there's some very, very interesting parallels between these two books, between Ruth and Esther. For example, Ruth was a Gentile and Esther was a Hebrew. Next, you have that Ruth lived among the Jews and Esther lived among the Gentiles. Ruth married a Jew, Esther married a Gentile. In Ruth, God is prominently featured. In the book of Esther, God is not mentioned even once. There are some secret, possibly hidden messages in the book of Ruth that reveal God's name, but God is not mentioned once in the book of Esther. Both women are shown to have great faith and faithfulness to God, and both women are greatly blessed by God. So those are some very interesting comparisons and contrasts regarding the books of Ruth and Esther. And I would encourage you to take a look at that, because I think there might be something there. Angela, I just received a call from Chris Feely. You want to call him back real quick and just check him out?
Real quick,
Yeah.
before you move on,
Sure.
Tracy's been doing studies on the two women idea, because
You mean like in the parables of the New Testament?
everywhere
Oh,
in the
okay.
Bible, when you have two women, because
Yeah.
of the idea that Israel and Judah are referred to as two sisters.
Oh, right.
And so, and then she compared Mary and Martha, and what happens with Lazarus, that when you see two women, you might look for the northern, a representation of the northern. and the
Sure,
southern.
sure, absolutely. Good insight, good insight. So those are just some notes that I want to encourage you to take a look at, because I think you could compare and contrast these two books and get some really interesting wisdom there, I think. I'm going to move forward a little bit. And here we are. I want to read with you Ruth chapter 1. Okay, so let's get right into chapter 1, and then we'll kind of tear this apart. And I want to just, before I start this book is really deep. You'd be surprised. I mean, it's only 4 chapters long, and it's very short. It's 85 verses, but it is incredibly deep. And I can tell you this, that if you don't have a pretty good handle on the Torah, you'll lose a lot of information in this book. There's the Torah. If you're not kind of well versed in the regulations and the rules of the Torah, if you haven't read the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you'll miss so much in this book, because it's stuff that's foreign to us. But I hope to bring out a lot of that stuff for you so that we can tie it all together, from going backwards to the Torah of Moses and forwards to the gospel of Yeshua. It's all tied together beautifully. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and read the entirety of Ruth chapter 1. It's not terribly long, but let's get started on that. You ready? Back in the days when the judges were judging, at a time when there was a famine in the land, a certain man from Bethlehem went to live in the territory of Moab. He, his wife, and his 2 sons. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Machlon and Kilion. They were Ephraim from Bethlehem in Judah. They arrived in the plain of Moab and settled there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, she and her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves from the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, That's not Oprah. And the name of the other was Ruth. That is actually how you say it in Hebrew, Ruth, but we call her Ruth. They lived there for about 10 years. Then Machlon and Kilion died, both of them, and the woman was left with neither her two sons nor her husband. So she prepared to return with her daughters-in-law from the plain of Moab. For in the plain of Moab she had heard how Jehovah had paid attention to his people by giving them food. She left the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law and took the road leading back to Judah. Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Each of you, go back to your mother's house. May Jehovah show grace to you, as you did to those who died and to me. May Jehovah grant you security in the home of a new husband." Then she kissed them, but they began weeping aloud. They said to her, "No, we want to return with you to your people." Naomi said, "Go back, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Do I still have sons in my insides who could become your husbands? Go back, my daughters. Go your way, for I'm too old to have a husband. Even if I were to say, I still have hope, even if I had a husband tonight and bore sons, would you wait for them until they grew up? Would you refuse to marry just for them? No, my daughters. On your behalf, I feel very bitter that the hand of Jehovah has gone out against me." Again they wept aloud. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth stuck with her. She said, "Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Go back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Don't press me to leave you and stop following you. Wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Jehovah bring terrible curses on me, and worse ones still, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city was stirred with excitement over them. The women asked, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she answered them. "Call me Mara, because Shaddai has made my life very bitter. I went out full, and Jehovah has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? Jehovah has testified against me. Shaddai has afflicted me." This is how Naomi returned, with Ruth, the woman from Moab, her daughter-in-law, accompanying her from the plain of Moab. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Did you see in there anything, and you know how I like to do this every once in a while, just kind of throw it out there for just a moment to have you briefly comment on things that just kind of stuck out to you there that you'd like to explore a little more?
On the last sentence there was Passover.
Yes, absolutely. Good observation. Anything else?
The use of Elohim and Yahweh.
Yes.
And also that when it said gods, yours said also gods, it said actually the same word, also Elohim.
Elohim, that's right. Yep. And did you notice also the word Shaddai? What did he say? Is that what you were talking about? Yeah, twice she said Shaddai. Shaddai has brought me back empty. Shaddai has visited evil upon me. You've heard that before, El Shaddai. Do you know what that means? There's been a big bunch of controversy about it actually for a long time. There have been many interpretations of that. Some have said the all-sufficient God. Some have suggested the many-breasted God. That sounds ridiculous to us because you might be thinking of like an asteroid or something, but what that is literally suggesting is like a mother's milk comes from the breast as being sufficient for a child, that the breasted one is providing it's the same exact idea as the all-sufficient God. It's just because shad is the Hebrew word for mother's breast. But there is new scholarship that has happened since the 1800s that suggests that the word Shaddai is actually saying the God of the mountain. So that's the latest scholarship, is Shaddai means God of the mountain. It's just an immovable force, if you want to think about it that way. Which kind of fits fairly well with what she's saying here at the end of this chapter. Anything else that you noted that was interesting or that piqued your attention? Okay, excellent. Yes,
one.
sure, yes.
Right, it just hit me, I guess, because in our maybe some marriage ceremonies, but may the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything, but death parts me from you.
Reminds you of a marriage covenant, doesn't it?
It does.
And I think that there's a very good reason for that.
Yes.
Very good observation. Yes, you're absolutely right. It does reflect a marriage covenant, very much so. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Any other just brief observations? Yes?
The two sons marrying non-Israelites.
What's that? Oh,
Her two sons marrying pagans.
yes, exactly. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Yes, them marrying Moabite women. And you might get the idea, I don't think they were supposed to do that, And some have suggested, maybe that's why they died, because they married the wrong woman. Well, if you marry the wrong woman, you might die, but I don't know that that's the case here.
But I also read that this was, it says not to intermarry, but the Moabites was the only ones that were not
That's okay.
excluded.
Hold on to that idea. I've heard that before. You hold on to that because we're going to discuss that a little bit more. Good insight. Okay, so let's move forward just a little bit here. Now, I want you to think about, right at the beginning here, we have this famine happening. Why is this famine happening? Well, it's because the Midianites and the Amalekites, likely, because they are raiding the land. Now, is God in charge of a famine? This is a theme that you're going to see repeated in this book continuously, is the sovereignty of God. Gracie?
He has to be in charge, either by withholding his sustaining hand or encouraging the thing to happen to
Yeah.
him about his work.
That's right. That's exactly right. When did you say something here?
Oh, is it Canon?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is clearly laid out in the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 27 and 28, 29 even. I mean, he specifically talks about, if you obey me and you do what I tell you to do, I'll bring rain and your crops will grow like crazy. Yeah, you'll be so blessed because your land will yield its fruit. I will also send your enemies scurrying in every direction. So what do we know right now when we start this book from the very first little paragraph? What is the state of the relationship of the Israelites with Yehovah at this point? They are not in obedience, and they are being punished. God's gracious, generous hand has been withheld. He is letting them eat the fruit of their own ways. Just as Angela, when she was speaking last time, said, well, what do you think? God sent snakes into the camp to bite the Israelites? No, the snakes were always there. His hand was keeping the snakes back. And he removed his protective hand. And that's unfortunately what happens in our lives very often, is if we are following God and doing what he says, then his blessings are upon us. And his barrier of protection is around us. And oftentimes, when things go wrong, we can, in a lot of cases, look around us and say, aha, I can see I can see what is the result of this, why this is happening to me. And now don't hear me say that there aren't circumstances like the book of Job, for example, where just bad things happen. And that you might be being affected by the sin of someone else, because you know that the ripples of sin go far and wide, that you can be affected by other people's sin. But clearly, in the very beginning of the book of Ruth, we see that the famine is upon the land, both, either whether it's from natural sources of not having enough rain or insects eating the crops, or the Amalekites and Midianites coming in, God's hand of protection is not upon them. Now, with that thought in mind, these people leave the land, and they become what is called in Hebrew gur. They are sojourners, a temporary resident. This does not signify that they are leaving Israel and don't plan to come back. They're like reneging, renouncing their Israelite heritage and becoming Moabites or something. They are simply taking a temporary journey, and there's a special Hebrew word for that. It's not ger, which is a different spelling of the same type of word. It's gur, which means a temporary resident. They planned to become temporary residents in the land of Moab. It reminds me, interestingly enough, of the book of James, where James says to the people, come now, you who say, we're going to go to such and such a city and we're going to engage in profit for a couple of years and make a bunch of money, but you don't even know how long you're going to live. Your life is like a breath of wind that comes and goes, raises up like flowers of the field, and then they're gone. They're thrown into the fire. What you should say is, if God decides that we should live, then we'll go forth and do such and such. And I'm not saying that they had that thought in mind. It's just saying it reminded me of that for whatever reason. Take that for what it's worth. So when they go to the land of Moab, what you might be considering is that they have gone to a land of pure Gentiles. Well, that's actually not quite the case. The land of Moab, in this time is also populated with Hebrew tribes. The Midianites, if you go across the river Jordan at this time into the land that was formerly Moab, remember that we're talking here about the relation of Balak and Balor. Remember those guys who tried to curse Israel, but they couldn't have Balaam and Balak, who tried to curse Israel? Those were Moabites. And the Moabites sent their daughters to have a party with the Israelites. And then this is one of our Torah portions just last week where Phineas stabbed those people through. Those were Moabites. And Moses said, make war against the Midianites. Kill all of the males of warrior age. So in this day, there are some scattered remaining Moabites in that land, but a lot of them are actually Hebrews who have conquered some of that land from the Moabites. So when it says they go to the territory of Moab, they are going to a remnant of the Moabites and if you look at it in this way, in the land of Moab, you have some remnant pockets of pure Moabites who are still there exercising their culture and their worship of the god Chemosh. And then up a little bit north, you have Hebrews who are inhabiting the land of Moab. And then in the middle area, you have Hebrews and Moabites intermingling. So when it says they're going to the land of Moab, I don't want you to think about a purely Gentile. This is slightly mixed. Most people wouldn't consider that, and I don't want to attach any significance to that just yet because I can't really speak to that definitively. But just something to bear in mind that there's the middle portion of Moab is most likely a mixed people, which we know from our previous studies is not a good thing either. Okay, so take a look at this. I want to give you just a brief introduction to our cast of characters. Now, first of all, the text says that these people are Ephrathites. Now, a lot of people have connected this with Ephraimites. That is not connected at all. They are, however, connected by a common Hebrew root. Does anyone remember what Ephraim means in Hebrew when Joseph named his firstborn son Ephraim. Do you remember that? Or excuse me, his secondborn son. You remember? Fruitful. Yes, absolutely. So Ephraim means fruitful. Ephrathites is based on the same Hebrew word, and it means the fruitful tribe. So this is not saying these are Ephraimites who are living in the land of Judah. It's basically saying that the clan of Elimelech, whom Boaz is a part of, the clan has a bit of a nickname. They are called Ephrathites because they are wealthy, because they own a lot of land and they grow a lot of crops. So they are nicknamed the Ephrathites. It's not connected with Ephraim at all. What's that?
How does that connect with Boaz?
Boaz is a relative of Elimelech. That's why there's this arranged marriage kind of thing when they come back to the land.
Well, I know, but I thought that you were talking about the Ephraimites?
The Ephrathites.
Ephrathites?
Yeah, it says that these are Ephrathites
But
from...
they're not related to Boaz.
Yeah, they are.
Oh, that's what you're saying then?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They are all from the same clan. Jerry?
Can we go back to the Moabs for just a minute?
Sure, absolutely.
I don't know if people, I wasn't aware, I got thinking about it, they came from Lot and stuff.
Yes, absolutely. These Moabites...
They came into existence,
Yep.
and they've been a thorn in their side
Yes.
all through the Bible, them and the Amorites.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to get into that just a little bit deeper in a moment. But yes, you're absolutely right. The Ammonites and the Moabites are the descendants of Lot. And it basically talks about how the Moabites have a heavy hand of God against them because they did not allow the children of Israel to pass through their land when they were coming out of slavery. That's a totally side issue, and I don't want to get sidetracked on that. However, you are absolutely correct that Moab and Ammon and who are the people down south? Edom, the Edomites, they're all related. They're all related through the tribe of Israel. So, just consider that. Now let's look at these names of these people, okay? So Elimelech, and you might recognize this beginning of this phrase from when Yeshua was hanging on the cross and he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, say, my God, my God. This is an Aramaic phrase which means my God is king. Melech is king. Eli is my God. My God is king. Okay? The next name is Naomi. We already know that her name means pleasant or kind, delightful, that kind of meaning. We have the two sons, Machlon, who is sick or weak. Strange. And then his brother, Kilion, which means pining, literally mentally or physically in decline. Now, it is likely that these are not their real names, that these are euphemisms that were used by the writer to give you some hint about these characters. It's not likely that a mother is going to name her son Sickly. Hey, check out my son Sickly, and here's my other son Pining. It's not likely that these are their real names. These are names used by the author to show us something regarding these people. Now, for Orpah and Ruth, these are Gentile names. These are Moabitish names. They are not Hebrew names, and so they're mostly guessed at. Orpah, if as far as the scholarship is concerned, means gazelle, perhaps, long-necked, or even stiff-necked. Notice that gazelles have long necks, and King David talks about this woman's neck, graceful like a gazelle, a long neck. They think that Orpah means gazelle or long neck or possibly stiff-necked. And I think the idea of stiff-necked is quite interesting regarding what happens with her. So just consider that. Ruth, best they can guess, is friendship or companion for Ruth. And I think that, again, these names were probably Gentile in origin, and so they're not really certain about what these names mean. But there's some interesting connections that you can make. I always look at biblical names in the Hebrew just because it's fascinating what kind of things you can learn. Do you remember what Boaz means? Boaz, we'll get to him later. I didn't include him here because he hasn't been introduced yet. Boaz means fleetness, swiftness. Why might that be? Do you remember what Naomi said about him? He will do the matter right away. He's a man who gets his business done. I think that's why they named him Fleetness. So, question.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Why didn't you include Mara in there?
Well, because that's a good question. I apologize. That's actually an oversight on my part. Thank you for pointing that out. Mara. Well, we know what Mara is, right?
Yeah, she's
Bitterness.
bitterness.
Mara, the waters of Mara, when they were in the wilderness and they didn't have anything to drink and they complained, and it says that's why they called it Mara, because the people were bitter and they complained. So yes, Mara means bitterness.
Yeah.
So yes, and you can see she's bitter.
She's really bitter.
She is bitter when she returns from the land of Moab because everybody that she loved is dead. All she's got is her daughters-in-law, and only one of them at that. The other one went back to her people and her gods.
She thought that the Lord is the one that did it.
Right. Absolutely. And that's a whole separate bag of worms right there.
Oh, yes.
So, thank you. Now, and that comes to this. Why did the males die? I mean, it is, not only is it tradition, but it also is pretty strongly hinted at in the text that the males of her household died at a rather young age. And that they died young. Now,
Ruth was only married 10 years.
well, it says that they spent, and you might get the impression that her husband Elimelech dies, and then her sons got married to these Moabite women, and then they lived there for about 10 years. What the Hebrew seems to be indicating is that their whole stay was only 10 years. So now the sequence certainly seems to suggest that they were there for a certain number of years, and her husband Elimelech dies. Then, or maybe contemporaneously, her sons marry these Moabite women, and then they die. But the whole term seems to only be about 10 years. Not a lot can happen in 10 years, but it's not a whole long time. But the question is,
Because said they died of war.
yeah, why? Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. You bring up an excellent point. When the Torah tells us about someone dying, if they are killed in battle or are murdered or something like that, it'll say they were killed, not they died. This seems to suggest disease. No, there wasn't any famine there because they went there to make money and because the crops were growing there. It either seems to be disease of some kind. I forgot what the other option was. It's simple. It just escaped my mind. Not war, likely, because that would have used the Hebrew word for being killed.
Yeah.
But this seems to suggest death by what we would consider natural causes, or just sickness, some type of disease, or death by natural causes. But either way, it's disease. Disease or decay is what causes death to begin with. But it seems strictly to be saying to us that these guys died young. And the question is, why? Why did they die?
And they both died.
Dad died and then they both died. And Naomi seems very clear in her determination, God did this to me. Now, we might look at that and have a difference of opinion. We might say, if we were trying to comfort Naomi, and you know how it is to comfort somebody who has lost a loved one, maybe they might consider before their time, why does this person die? Somebody might say, bad things happen to good people. You can't explain it. But Naomi herself firmly believes that God is the one who caused it. And there is rampant speculation, as you can imagine, regarding why these sons of hers and her husband died. Now, it is common practice that a woman who marries a man in the tribes of Israel is considerably younger than he is. So it is possible that even though Naomi says, I'm an old woman and I'm not going to be marrying again, it could be that her husband, Elimelech, was already pretty old. Because that's just common, you know. And I have talked about this before, and I'll just bring it to your attention one more time. In those days, if I had a daughter and I wanted to marry her off to somebody, I am not marrying her off to someone who's her age. I mean, it's likely that she's going to be married off when she's anywhere between the ages of 15 and 17, 18 years old. I don't want her marrying a 15 to 17-year-old. He has no wisdom. He has no experience. He has no trade. He has no money. I don't want to marry her off to somebody like that. I'm looking for a man who is established. If he's 30, 40, even 50, even better. To us, that sounds like an abhorrence. We would call that child abuse and statutory rape and all kinds of other stuff. But in those days, not so.
They made sure that the women were taken care of.
Yes, they wanted their daughters to be taken care of, and a mature man would be much better able to do that.
She was a lot younger than he.
Yeah, so it's likely, and that's one of the reasons, like in the New Testament, that you hear about Joseph, the husband of Mary, for the first couple of chapters, and you never hear from him again. It's likely that he was old, and he died.
I feel sorry for the women.
Well, yeah, in our day and age, you might say, oh man, that's horrible.
What do they call it, set up marriage?
Yeah, the women definitely had a say in the matter. They don't force their women to marry somebody they don't want to marry, but they are arranged in a sense. But it's possible that Elimelech died simply because he was old. Because if he did marry a younger woman, and it's likely that he did, by the time that he's dead, she's already fairly old. So he might have been really old. It's certainly possible. But she is attributing the son's death with her. She's got two fairly young sons. She definitely is attributing to God that he took the life of her sons and her husband.
She's grieving not only her husband, but she's grieving
Right.
her boys.
In 10 years, lost all three of them. And she's...
Her daughter-in-law is thinking they might leave.
Right.
She's old and can't work on her own.
Yep.
But is this not a lesson to us today?
Oh, it's all kinds of lessons for us today. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, and in what way do you say so?
Well, first thing, it shows that the importance of women.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more on that.
Well, because the man really was men were more, what I want to say.
You better say it carefully, whatever it is.
Well, they were strong. They're the ones that ruled the family.
Sure, yeah.
Sure. And so we're taking the men out of here. Now, this is just me thinking.
I agree. It's a very interesting observation.
Showing the importance of women.
Yes.
And also it can be a lesson today because there are many, we're talking about a widow here. And there are many widows. And so they do pine for their husbands.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is a story like that.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right in that this is a strong story about women. In fact, did you notice when Naomi was telling her daughters to go back, where did she tell them to go back to? To the house of their mothers. Not the house of their fathers. You almost never hear that in the scripture. And you always return to the house of your father, not your mother. So does that mean that these two women who are also widows, their fathers were already dead as well? Or is this story just really heavy on the role of the woman? It's a very interesting story in that regard. Angela?
The women looking for the grooms are not present, and they're searching for a groom. Two sisters, women. Never mind.
Okay, you're throwing out some mysterious stuff. I'm going to hope that you back it up a little bit. Yeah, tell us about the big picture that you're seeing.
His people, Israel.
Yes.
People.
Yes, the bridegroom,
The covenant with God Yeshua being the groom and his people being the bride. And so this is a book about the bride.
Yep.
And so we're looking at the bride, the Gentile bride, and this is our third book in a row that we're talking about this inclusion of the
Gentiles. Yep.
Right? Acts,
Yep.
Jonah, and now this book.
Yep. Yeah.
Seems to be running.
That's a great idea. Great insight, because you will see very much so that if you look at the book of Judges, I think there's a very good case to be made. The next time you read through the book of Judges, do it in this light. The period from the first coming of Yeshua to the second coming of Yeshua, that is the book of the Judges. The book of the Judges is a prophetic shadow picture of the time period between the first and the second comings of Yeshua. It very much is. Characterized by every man doing what is right in his own eyes. And, yes, yeah, very much so. And tying right in with what Angela spoke of just a moment ago is this idea of these women being without a husband. That so ties in very beautifully with the New Testament scriptures regarding Yeshua, the Messiah, being the bride, being the husband looking for his bride, and his bride is pining for their husband. You know, that this whole idea of the husband and the wife and the bride of the Messiah is very, very powerful in this book. And I would consider taking a look at the book of Judges and reading it in that light. And remember that the book of Ruth is happening during that same period of time. Okay, what time is it? Am I totally getting long in the tooth here? 8:30. Okay, so I got a couple more minutes. So the question here we had before us was, why did the men die? What is going on here? Naomi is certainly thinking it's God causing it. Now here's a quote from the Talmud, Baba Bathra, 91a. This is some rampant speculation on the part of the sages of Israel. It says here, the sages taught that one may not leave the land of Israel to live outside of the land of Israel unless the price of 2 se'ah of grain stood at a selah, meaning it is doubled in price. Rabbi Shimon said, when does this exception permitting one to leave the land of Israel under certain circumstances apply? It applies when one is unable to find produce to buy, as he has no money. But when one has money and is able to buy produce, even if the price of a se'ah of grain stood at double its value, he may not leave. I think that's an interesting bit of wisdom. It sounds weird to us. And the Jews are notorious for saying this, that every Jew belongs in the land of Israel. You'll hear, the Zionists in our day say the same thing. The Jews who live in the land of Israel think that every Jew around the world should leave wherever they are and go to the land of Israel. That is a strong foundational principle of theirs. And they also tie that into the coming of the Messiah for them. Okay, that the Jews need to be in their land. And what's interesting to me is I'm not looking at it quite like they are. I'm looking at it a little bit differently, but I think it's slightly similar, and I want to propose something to you. It occurs to me that perhaps God punished them because they tried to escape His punishment. And let me explain myself. When God brings judgment upon us, or maybe just something to test our faith because we have grown soft, we've grown weak or something, and He's allowing a refining to occur in our lives. Often, our inclination is to find a way around the problem. That is our natural inclination. It is the fleshly response to every difficulty that we face. Whether it's money, whether it's health, whether it's relationship problems, whatever it is that we are struggling with, our natural inclination is to find a way around the problem. God's purpose for us is always to go through the problem. He says, I will be with you, I will strengthen you with my righteous right arm, and I will take you through a problem. But we get squirrely. And we don't like dealing with pain and tribulation and suffering, and we're always looking for a way out, a way around. We don't want to go through, we want to go around. And it occurs to me that if during this time period that God sent the Moabites and the Amalekites against the land and they were being destroyed by their enemies, that God's hand of judgment is heavy upon them. No question about it. And what does this man do? He packs up and he leaves. He's trying to escape the judgment of God. Instead of being faithful and doing what is right, sometimes It's Peter, I believe, says, no, maybe it's Paul, I don't remember which, but you'll catch my drift in a second. He says, it's all well and good to suffer patiently for doing wrong. You don't receive blessings for that. But if anyone is suffering as a Christian, let him glorify God. Okay, because there's special blessings that come from suffering righteously rather than suffering unrighteously. If this is a story about a faithful remnant and God's heavy hand of judgment is upon the nation, do you think that He will supply the needs of His faithful people when the bulk of the people are being punished? Do you remember the psalm that David wrote that says, I have lived a long time, and I have never seen a righteous person begging for bread, or his children out there begging. God always provides for His faithful remnant. And that has been a great comfort to me. Not that I'm some great faithful remnant, but it encourages me to say, and I have had this happen to me in certain times of my life, when bad things are happening, but I just seem to be shielded from it in a certain sense. Have you ever experienced the hand of God just protecting you from certain things that you really maybe should have been affected by, but just weren't? I know you all have had tremendous blessings even in the midst of difficulties. I know you have, because you're faithful people who I'm not saying you're always faithful. You stumble, you make stupid decisions just like I do, but I think that your lives have been characterized by a certain amount of faithfulness, and you've seen God being faithful to that. And I think it's possible, just possible, that Elimelech removed his family from the land of Israel because he wanted to escape difficulty.
I always say that through our greatest suffering comes our greatest joy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Every single time.
Absolutely. And I think it's possible that it seems that when you say he was an Ephrathite, that means fruitful.
Yeah.
He was obviously doing okay in the land of Israel in spite of this famine and destruction. So why did he leave? I think possibly he's thinking, this sucks. I can do better somewhere else. When God was saying, really? You stay right where you are and see the hand of the Lord, because I am blessing you with fruitfulness even in the midst of this famine and persecution by your enemies. And I think, unfortunately, it's possible that he thumbed his nose at God in spite of God showing him great blessing, said, I will put my hedge of protection around you and make you fruitful even in the midst of this suffering because you were a faithful remnant. But I think he took that for granted. And he thought, man, if I can be so blessed right here, just imagine what I could do over there.
But if God says not to, then it don't matter how much you can be over
That's
there.
right.
You need to stay here and
That's right.
see the hand of the Lord.
He probably should have stayed where he was and seen the hand of God working in his life and in the lives. He could have been an inspiration to the people around him who were maybe not being so faithful. Could have seen him as an example. And God might have thwarted his attempt to escape the persecution. Just an idea.
Yeah, I've been reading a book about open doors.
Yes.
And what God. Well, there, if it's saying what you said, the door was open for him to stay there.
Yeah.
But when he left, the door shut.
That's right. That's right. And nothing good came from it. There was no blessings there. He lost his sons. His wife, his children married foreign women. The blessing of God came about because one of those foreign women decided to adopt their God, but the other one did not.
Yeah.
So what did we gain? We lost more than we gained. We got Ruth, and she's awesome. But we lost 4 people. We lost her husband, we lost her 2 sons, and we lost Orpah. But we gained Ruth. Ruth is critical, and she's important, but we lost 4 to that one.
And it was cool what Ruth said to her mother-in-law. I will go where you go.
Yeah.
Be with you where you are, and I will serve your God.
Yes, and that's a huge thing. But unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that because that's quite complex, and it has a lot that needs to be said about it. And so I don't want to go any further because this is where stuff gets really, really good and really complicated. So I'm going to save this until next time.